Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. I'm your moderator today, Karl Cassell, President and CEO of Horizons, a Family Service Alliance. In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development released Our Common Future, also known as the Brundtland Report, which defines sustainable development as that which meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. The current U.S. population benefits from the investments that were made over the past several decades to build our nation's water infrastructure. It is ironic that modern economic development consumes huge volumes of water and damages the very sources of water they depend on. There are new sources of unregulated population produced in the name of economic growth. How do we manage in the 21st century our most valuable natural resource here in the corridor? On the panel with me today, I have three experts that are going to join me in discussing this topic. To my immediate left, we have Todd Steigerwaldt, manager of the Marion Water Department. Good morning.
Good morning.
In the middle, we have Robert Libra, state geologist. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
And on our end here, we have Jerry Schnoor of the University of Iowa College of Engineering. Good morning.
Hi, Karl. Good morning.
So thank you guys for joining me today. And this topic is obviously very broad, and we could go 101 different ways. But I really want to talk about sustainable development, and more importantly, how we locally deal with this issue, but also how the world is looking at it, so from a global perspective. And so without any further ado, just going to jump in, start asking you questions, and feel free to jump in and answer, whoever wants to go first. Are we encouraging sustainable water infrastructure currently today?
I think if you, there's a couple of kinds of infrastructures here maybe. And the one that we deal with a lot is what you might call the natural infrastructure. Okay, so what's the status of the groundwater we have underground? How much, how good, for how long, what are the threats to it? Same thing for our streams. And so this comes really from both quantity of water, do we have enough, and the quality. Is it good enough for what we need it for? I was kind of a water-rich state, but we're kind of getting to the point where we know we can't just use the water from any source we want, as much as we want, forever. We're seeing that kind of concept catch up to us. And the first step in infrastructure is to understand your supply, and then the built infrastructure is what do you decide to do about that? How does that work together?
Absolutely.
Regarding the built infrastructure, there was a report that came out recently from the American Society of Civil Engineers, which indicates that we're kind of falling behind, that we have most of the infrastructure for water and wastewater, let's say from the Rockies to the east, is maybe 100 years old and crumbling. And that we have in arrears maybe $3.6 trillion, they estimate, of expenses that need to be invested in that infrastructure. That's bridges, roads, water, wastewater, everything. But for Iowa too, and they gave us a grade of D for how we're doing. For Iowa, it was similarly grim, maybe slightly better grade, but perhaps $10 billion behind on water and wastewater infrastructure alone. So that's rebuilding our delivery of drinking water to people, the distribution systems, and rebuilding the sewers for wastewater treatment, collection, and the treatment plants themselves.
And Marion's doing that currently with our total street reconstructions, where every time the street's been opened up, we're replacing our old ancient water mains that are going in there. Anytime we have that opportunity, it's well needed. Definitely need to keep on top of that, but there's never enough money to do all the water mains. And we still had over 20 some water main breaks this past season, and they continue to grow. So we're trying to stay on top of that, but water infrastructure is a critical component to the sustainability of supplying good quality water to the citizens.
Absolutely. So let me ask this next question, and some of it has been answered, but I'd certainly like to hear a little more in depth. What is the role of infrastructure planning specifically? What is the role of the planning?
Well, because maybe there's some driving forces that, as Bob Libra said, are making our natural resources, water resources, become more in short supply. And that has to do with increasing population. Like Marion is a really fast-growing city. North Liberty is another one. Stressing groundwater supplies, so kind of population growth and where we live and how we live. And our industry, too, it's a happy thing to create jobs, but sometimes industry as well uses more and more water and puts us in short supply. The biofuels industry is a perfect example in Iowa.
One of the things that's gone on in Iowa and really across the world over the last 50 years is concentration. We've concentrated people, so the water demand concentrates with them. Yep. Industry concentrates with them. Recently, we've concentrated agriculture, particularly in terms of livestock. And when you localize the water demand, then you put more stress both on the natural infrastructure and the built infrastructure, because you've got this demands to meet, especially during peak times, during droughts or situations like that, when everybody wants lots of water. And the system that operates okay the rest of the time has a hard time dealing with that, both the natural system and the built system.
And Marion's currently facing a local challenge of our Jordan Aquifer, where we get all of our water from. The DNR has kind of challenged us that they're seeing some dramatic drawdowns in certain areas of the state. Marion happens to be one of those corridors, and right now we're planning for the future with the infrastructure. We know we're a growing community. We know we need to meet future demand, so we are seeking alternative sources. We're looking at other aquifers to sustain us for the foreseeable future.
Okay. So what is the water infrastructure gap? What does that mean to the normal everyday citizen?
It could be, for what I would interpret it as, there's a gap for the infrastructure. You need to plan for the future, plan to remove and replace all of those old infrastructure needs, but then also raise rates accordingly so that you're not overcharging for the water. You still want to have affordable water for the mass population, but yet as we move forth, energy costs are going up. Chemicals continue to go up to treat the water, and at some point we have to also raise those rates to match those infrastructure needs.
I think it refers to the gap, this deferred maintenance that we mentioned, $3.6 trillion for the United States. That's a gap in what we should be investing in our water and what we've failed to do in recent years.
I can think of a water operator from one of the larger cities in the state going, if your average good water main pipe lasts 100 years, I'm on a 600-year replacement cycle. And Todd knows this, of course.
Yes, I do.
But the problem is we are very used to quite cheap water. And so raising the rates to put yourself onto a sustainable maintenance plan becomes very difficult. Certainly. Because, well, why is the water going up in price so much?
Do you think we could raise the rates enough to cover the cost of fixing, or where are we going to find the money?
Marion's been raising rates every year, slightly, trying to play catch up. We have outstanding debt from our new water sources, but it is not a popular item to raise. Other rates are also going up. Your sewer rates, your electricity, everything else goes up, but we are conservatively raising rates just to stay afloat and keep everything in balance. Would I like to see them raised higher? Yes, but there are also political outfalls there. So as long as the bills are getting paid and we have cash reserves there for emergencies, we're doing fine. But we do, as a manager, you have to look down the road and plan for the future. So unfortunately, rates will continue to increase.
Anything else to add, either one?
There's another kind of maybe of water unsustainability, Karl, that we haven't talked about too much, and that's due to climate change. And of course, Cedar Rapids is really struggling with it, and other communities in Iowa. And that's it. We have too much water sometimes and too little waters.
Absolutely.
In general, that's the case from climate change that we see globally, that kind of arid areas are getting drier, and there's reason for that, and wet areas getting wetter. We happen to be sort of a wet area by that definition, and we're enduring floods, as you know, from recent years, many, and even punctuated by drought in 2012.
Absolutely. Anything to add? Okay, so let's talk about some of the global issues and just start with the question, is fresh water humanity's biggest problem? When we think of it on 7 billion people on the planet, is fresh water, if not the biggest, one of our biggest problems?
You know, it might be, and for one reason is that, you know, number one, you have to have it.
Yep.
And number two, there's a tight link between, in much of the world, and in this country as well, between water and food.
Right.
Because so much food is irrigated.
Yeah, good point.
So many crops are irrigated across the world. And Jerry mentions climate change, and from what I know, most of the predictions are the places that are irrigated are likely to be the ones that are hit the hardest by more dryness. And so the two meet there. You know, you take water and food and put those on the same plate, that's a pretty big problem. Yeah.
If it starts with water, per your question, is it the biggest issue? If it's not the biggest, it is right up there with the top three. You got to have water for those civilizations to live, and you also need the water for the farming. So without water on a global scale, water is probably the top issue. Without it, there is no life.
I guess the one that we haven't mentioned is energy. So this is kind of a troika, you know, of water, food, and energy. If you want more water, you're going to need some energy to exploit the resources, whether it be the aquifer, the Jordan aquifer, or desalination of brackish water or whatever. It's going to take energy.
Absolutely.
And so those three are all connected, water, food, and energy. Maybe we could lift them all into the most important problem.
Yeah, and energy takes a lot of water.
It does.
It does. People don't always think about that,
Certainly,
but
certainly.
you know.
Well, and so that begs the question, we know water is cheap. Technology to clean it and the energy to run that technology isn't. How do we strike the balance? Do you see that happening in your fields? Do you hear people talking about it?
Yeah, to strike that balance, water, the cost of water has to go up to match the energy costs, the chemical costs, the other inputs that are involved there. Otherwise, you are out of balance, and something will have to give.
People are starting to talk about, as Todd said, how do we preserve our aquifers, like the Jordan aquifer? Maybe we even need to recharge it. You know, we've pumped it down 150 or 200 feet through decades of use. Maybe we should think about reusing water, treating it to a very high quality, and re-injecting it to restore the aquifer and make it more sustainable. That's something the field is talking about. In addition to folks in the arid areas that Bob was mentioning, you know, they're looking at desalination. San Diego right now, the county is building the largest desalination plant in the United States at great expense, billions of dollars. And of course, the citizens have to afford those costs.
We do have places in the state that are doing that, that are doing the aquifer storage and recovery, as they call it. So in the winter, when there is lots of water and little demand, the water goes into the deep underground. Peak demand, it comes back out. Again, I think I said before, Iowa's kind of been thinking of itself as pretty water rich for a long time. We haven't really put these kinds of concepts in play yet. They are going along in more populated areas and more arid areas, or reuse of gray water. Stuff comes out of the treatment plant, and there are places in California and Arizona where there's taps all over the place, and that's what you use to water the bushes or the lawn, wash the car. It says, don't drink this, you know. That's a big capital investment, though. they're doing it because they have to.
Maybe that's a good segue to mention, Carl, that for the first time there's communities in the United States just in the past couple of years that are practicing direct potable reuse. By that I mean they're taking wastewater from the sewage treatment plant, treating it very highly, mixing it with the source water for their drinking water treatment plant and drinking that directly. They're overcoming, I guess, the yuck factor, the idea that people just don't want to go there. But in fact, Big Spring, Texas and Wichita Falls, Texas now have direct potable reuse. They're drinking their wastewater, highly treated wastewater.
Yeah, certainly. Well, so let's talk about America a little bit more. We're seeing a growth in population, people moving out of the rural into larger population centers. Can we continue as a country to grow at the rate that we are and still maintain or even use less water? And as I look at places like Las Vegas, which is built on a desert, but using tremendous amounts of water for fountains and everything else that they're doing, can we continue to grow and use less water or even kind of stabilize the amount of water usage that we're currently using?
I would say no. As the population grows, every consumer uses X amount of water. They cannot not use water. So on the average, every individual uses between 70 to 100 gallons of water per day. So if we're going to grow, and growth meaning population base, those people are still going to use water. So you're not going to use any less water. They can be more conservative on those numbers, but if the population's increasing, we're using more water, period.
I think some of the Las Vegas and Phoenixes of the world have woken up to the fact that they can't, and they're looking at conservation measures and lots of things. But like Todd said, just that added demand, you can cut, if you're growing at 10% and you cut your demand by 10%, you haven't gained. Right. You're still sitting the same. Right. Jerry talked about direct reuse. Well, Los Angeles, I talked to the water operator from there at a conference about a year ago. They are, how did he put it, convincing our customer base that this would be okay. They're moving in that direction.
They're already doing what's called indirect potable reuse. They're treating their wastewater, sewage, very highly and re-injecting it into the aquifer, both to stave off salinity intrusion from the sea, as well as to recharge the aquifer, which is, so that's indirect potable reuse, because then they take that treated water back up for the drinking water at a later time.
So they know they have the technology to do it safely. They're working on, like you said, the yuck factor. This is a PR campaign.
Certainly.
You're kind of drinking it already. It's okay, right? Yeah.
And there's a big cost in doing that too. Yeah. So they're very short on water. So if they're short, you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
No matter what.
So what is the simplest method of educating the populace? Because as these places are having to do this, how do we start educating the masses? Maybe people here in Iowa, of course, we like to believe we're resource rich and that day will never come. What can we do in preparation to prevent that day from coming sooner than later?
Well, one way to do it, would not be the popular way, would be to turn the water off at the spigot. Yeah. So you wake up that morning, what is the value of water? You'll find out when you don't have your water first thing for your coffee, for your shower. Yeah. It's kind of pun intended there, but that is the value of water. People do take it to granted. So if you want to shock everybody all at once, turn the water off one by one, or maybe the mayor in town or somebody like that. And
but necessity is the mother of invention, I think. If you look for the state that probably conserves the water best in the United States, and might surprise you, it is California. Wow. Because they're a state with 38 million people, maybe 20 million in the lower half, and they only get enough rainfall in that area, the Los Angeles, San Diego, Santa Barbara area, for about 2 million people. So they are very good at conserving water, and their prices are much higher than our prices, and maybe that's what it will eventually take here too.
I think we're just getting to the point where it's popping onto the consciousness that we have to start thinking differently. And so it's a challenge. It's hard to convince people when it's been so cheap and so easy, you know, and it's that problem of trying to get people, in some ways, in Iowa's situation, to look out 20 years and go, you know, this could all work out if we start thinking now, if we start planning now, if we diversify this, if we start, you know, doing better maintenance on the infrastructure or different kinds of technologies. It's hard to get people to want to put up money or pay attention to solve a problem that's 20 years down the road.
Bob, you and Todd were talking earlier about what happened to the cattle industry in Iowa during our drought in 2012. I think that's an interesting story to share.
Yeah, and it was a kind of a convergence of things between lots of rural areas going on rural water systems, kind of like a public water system like Todd runs, but covers a couple of counties maybe. At the same time, the livestock industry concentrated, just like people have been concentrating. They concentrated the livestock industry, and that industry became more and more dependent slowly through time since the last drought on the rural water systems. Suddenly it's very dry. They have less water that they can produce. It's very hot. The animals need lots of water to drink, spray them down, cool confinement buildings for hogs. Those two things met, and it was getting very tense. It was getting pretty tense. That's a big economic factor in the state. You know, we have to think about whether we've got this right.
So we have to think about drought, but we have to think about too much water too. And Cedar Rapids is, you know, considering levees on both sides of the river.
So let's talk a little bit in our few minutes we have left about big business. GE and IBM are learning to reduce their water use. They use a considerable amount of water. And they've created water divisions within their companies. Will this be a catalyst for other large multinational corporations or even local municipalities to start trying to figure out how to better manage wastewater? Will they start looking to these companies to help solve some of those problems?
I would say certainly somebody needs to take the lead, and those two companies you mentioned are taking the lead. Somebody's got to stick their neck out there and try it. There are costs involved, certainly, but what is the long-term ramifications if the water isn't there, if we don't start conserving now? But again, the water is fairly cheap, so we need to start looking for the future. There is a cost associated for the new technology, the new efficiencies that are out there, changing the mindsets of people that like the 20-minute shower. They'll have to take shorter showers and use the technology that those companies are producing to save water and for future generations.
Along with smart water metering, I guess that those companies are pioneering, we need to have smart pricing policies too, and that depends on good government, which we don't always have either.
See, you can say that again. Anything?
No.
Sure? Okay. So we have about 5 minutes left. So we know all our water problems, for most people, they're local. People see it as a local issue. I don't necessarily care what's happened in Bangladesh or Australia if there's drought and or flooding. But those consequences, damages, and cost are anything but local. There's a rippling effect. And we're losing an enormous amount of human potential. When we look at about a billion people with lack of access to fresh water. How do we deal with that locally, but also have a mindset that even though we're okay, it's affecting someone else? I know if we stop drinking bottled water, it's not going to get more water to people in these places, but any thoughts? A billion people at least are water insecure. How do we deal with that at a local level?
You bring up the bottle, maybe you tax the bottled water industry, and whatever tax you come from the bottles could go overseas or help some of those industries over there.
It is a problem, and and you say what it takes away in human potential, in a lot of countries, you spend a lot of your time getting water. Yeah. In a lot of countries, that's delegated to the girls. And they don't see school so much because they're walking to the river and bringing water back. In a lot of those cases, the natural infrastructure, the water may be there, but how do you get in even just simple systems to make it work? A well, it's sanitary. Very difficult, because you can't, it's hard to come in and put in a big system. It's almost got to be local kinds of things dispersed over large areas to help folks out.
Certainly the foundations and non-governmental organizations, some of them are devoted to water in developing countries, and they have made some improvements. In fact, we had over the last 15 years, the United Nations Millennium Development Goals has reduced from maybe about 1.4 billion people without safe drinking water down to maybe 900 million now. So we have made some improvements in that, and actually they met the goal over that 15-year period. So I would mention one thing we need to do is redouble our efforts for what goes after 2015 for our next goal to have as a planet through the United Nations. I think that's the only game in town, really, to reach out to all the countries. Each country needs their own plan, but we can help each other in achieving that plan. Sanitation is one that hasn't done as well, actually, even as safe drinking water. So we certainly need improvements in that area. Certainly.
Well, it's a topic that we haven't even really begun to scratch the surface on, and we always wish we had more time. Any final thoughts quickly as our time is winding down?
Well, I think Jerry's mentioned climate change. You take all these challenges we've talked about and put in an unpredictable climatic future, and it just makes them harder. And it makes the need to start thinking about it and addressing it more and more important.
Absolutely. Well, that's perfect. We certainly thank our guests today, Todd, Bob, Jerry, for taking your time to speak with us. Again, we mentioned all water problems are local. The consequences, the damages, the costs are anything but local issues. Conversations about sustainable water are mandatory and must be facilitated. Many recognizable leaders across different sectors, we're sitting with them today, of the economy are collaborating to ensure water sustainability. Please join those who are implementing measures that don't compromise sustainable development. Good morning.